I give up. No, I know, it sounds funny, but I do. For those in the room who know me, this might come as a shock. Since I was 11 years old, I've been called an activist, a change maker, and a defier of the status quo, and sometimes a pain too. My high school personality was defined by raising my hand to disagree with the teachers and turning offhand comments into unsolicited lectures about morality. I was addicted to the debate, armed with a list of resources and a Google Doc too. But then, at some point towards the end of high school, I started realizing I didn't want people to be wrong. It was so much easier to be in the same space as someone when we could both find a way to be right. So it's only after a lot of reflection and some Jacob-worthy internal wrestling that I've finally reached this conclusion. I give up trying to engage with hate through education. I give up trying to correct every lie. I give up believing that if I can just find the right doorway, the emotional hook, or the perfectly phrased explanation, someone will finally be willing to sit down at the table and hear me. The truth is, I'm exhausted and I'm overwhelmed. I wasn't planning on talking about any of this tonight. In fact, I had plans for a much different sermon about magic and witchcraft, a class that I had taken last fall. But then, on Wednesday night, a friend called me just as I had turned the lights off in my room. Reluctantly, I answered the phone. After getting over his initial surprise that I, Samantha Przybisiki, was potentially going to sleep before midnight, he moved into his story. He had been in a conversation with his coworkers that led to a question of where everyone was from. When prompted, he replied that it was a bit of a mixed bag. He was from all over the place, mostly Eastern European, Polish, German, and Israeli. His coworkers interjected, "You probably shouldn't be saying that," followed by a, "Wait, are you Jewish?" That led to the end of the conversation and them walking away. For them, the realization of his Judaism meant it was no longer time to be in his presence. That same night, he went to a trivia night with friends, where he met two guys and a girl who were working on a different team also at his job. What started with initial curiosity about his chai necklace from the girl was interrupted by the two boys, claiming that Zionism was Nazism, Jews ran the media, and that Ashkenazis weren't ethnically Jewish. They claimed distaste towards an ethnic state that killed or imprisoned anyone who wasn't a supporter of the Zionist cause as a means of furthering their genocidal plot. Now, my friend is a student of my endless lectures about what I've been learning in my internship this summer at the JDC's Task Force for Arab Citizens of Israel. So, in the heat of it all, he responded with curiosity and gentleness that I don't think I could have managed in the moment. He simply offered another perspective and asked them what they thought about the 20% of Israelis who were Arab. One of the boys responded, "That's a lie. There are no Arabs living in Israel." And that was the last thing I heard before I zoned out from the rest of his story. I was livid. How do you even start a conversation when someone calls reality a lie? So I gave up. I didn't offer him advice or an answer. All I could manage to come up with was, "I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. Your existence should have never become someone else's chance for performative activism." I spent all of yesterday at work, unable to think about anything else. When I got home, I did what I always do on Thursday nights before leading services. I opened my laptop, opened a blank document, and stared at the Parsha Ekev. Now, usually by this point in the week, I've at least convinced myself that I know what I want to say. But this time, I had absolutely nothing. I kept rereading Moses' words to the Israelites from the Parsha, "Remember God." Okay, I get that, I know. But what am I supposed to do with that information? Parshat Ekev takes place as the Israelites stand at the edge of the Promised Land after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Moses knows he won't be going with them, so this is one of his final opportunities to speak to the people he has led. Again and again, he tells them not to forget where they've come from, who carried them through the wilderness, and the values that brought them to this moment. At some point, I stopped looking at the individual verses and started asking a different question. Why is Moses saying all of this right now? Moses isn't giving a random collection of reminders like my mom before I try to leave the house to do basically anything. He's standing at the edge of the promised land. 40 years are ending. An entirely new chapter is beginning, a chapter without Moses. Moses can't ask them to remember 40 years of his leadership all equally, so he has to make a decision. What is worthy of being remembered? Abraham Joshua Heschel describes the prophet as someone capable of seeing both the bark and the tree, the individual moment and the larger story it belongs to. I don't think that I had forgotten how to do that. If anything, I'd become almost obsessive about it. I've spent so much of my time trying to understand the people shouting the loudest that I'd never considered that the question wasn't only how I was paying attention, it was what I was paying attention to. Because when I got off the phone that night, I genuinely thought I knew what the story was. It was a story about anti-Semitism. But I didn't, because it wasn't a story about anti-Semitism. There had been a girl there. The conversation in the bar had only begun because of a girl's initial curiosity about a chai necklace. But we've forgotten that part of the story by now. Her questions were honest. She admitted that she didn't really have knowledge or an opinion, but she was listening. After the boys had walked away, she had stayed back to share something she was thinking about that my friend had said. She said, "You told me that for you, Judaism isn't about getting into heaven. It's about trying to make the world slightly better than it was when you woke up. And you do that not because history repeats itself or the future is ours to shape, but because you said you believe in us having the ability to live in the best possible version of the current moment." She thanked him for teaching her that Judaism responds to hate with humanity. She said that while she didn't believe in religion, she felt that his sentiments about doing good for the world reflected her outlook on doing good for the world too. I'm furious with the two boys. I'm frustrated that they don't want to learn or engage, but I'm just as frustrated with myself that I managed to overlook the girl. I hadn't just forgotten that she existed, but until my friend brought her up again, I had completely decided that she was unimportant to the story. Somewhere along the way, the loudest part of a story had become the part I assumed mattered the most. And once I noticed that in myself, I couldn't stop seeing it everywhere else. Every day, we open our phones to news articles and Instagram reels that make us dread the rest of the day. Before lunchtime, we're already overwhelmed by the noise of the world, convinced it can only get worse, arguing with strangers online and loved ones, believing that certainty must take precedence over curiosity. We spend so much time talking about the loudest expressions of hate that we almost never talk about what living alongside the noise actually feels like. For me, it's not usually a headline. It looks like getting into an Uber on my way to work and deciding whether I'm going to tell the driver that I study Jewish studies, religious studies, or just politics, or just hope that they don't ask at all. If they ask where I'm heading, I already know I'm probably not going to say the synagogue or the Jewish nonprofit, because before I even got in the car, I entered the address of the building next door instead. It looks like wondering whether telling someone where I work is going to turn a conversation about my internship into a conversation about whether I deserve to exist. A few weeks ago, I was walking to a barber shop in the Bronx with 3 Israeli friends. About 20 feet from the door, one of them stopped, looked at me and said, "Oh, by the way, if they ask where we're from, just say Austria." I didn't ask why. I didn't have to. It looks like arguing with my family over breakfast about whether today is a day I should wear my Jewish star openly because I'm going to the airport or a new doctor's office or I'm getting in an Uber. None of those moments are the ones that will ever make the news because they're too ordinary, but they accumulate. Paying attention, though, is a spiritual discipline. It requires to ask what all the noise has allowed us to overlook. It requires us to look for the people who are listening, to question what feels obvious long enough to consider that there may be another route, and to be honest about the fears and questions we don't know how to resolve. The last part there might be the hardest, because it requires someone to be the first to admit that they don't know. But let me try anyway. Election season is upon us, in America and in Israel. I don't know if I'll feel secure as a Reformed Jew in either place once the ballot boxes close. But I do know that fear is not the only thing happening right now. There are still people asking honest questions. There are still people willing to admit that they don't know enough to have an opinion. There are still people creating spaces where someone else doesn't have to hide parts of themselves just to belong. They may not be the people who command our attention, and they may not be the people that we remember first, but they're there, and we have to become better at noticing them. Don't become so captivated by the loudest voices that you forget to notice the people who are actually listening. Notice the people who stay. They are our community. They are the people we build bridges with. They are the people we learn from. They are the people that remind us that curiosity still exists. When I sat down to write this sermon yesterday, I thought I was carrying and sharing a story about two boys in a bar, but I wasn't. I was carrying the story of a girl who stayed. And tonight, I'm carrying something else too. If Moses asks us to choose what is worthy of remembering, then this is what I'll remember. I'll remember a room where Jews and non-Jews shared a Shabbat dinner before walking into services together. I'll remember a room where people chose curiosity over certainty, presence over assumption, and showed up for one another before any of us knew what I was going to say. I'll remember looking out from this bima and realizing that the people I spent the last 10 to 15 minutes asking us to notice were already in this room. They were already here with us. Shabbat Shalom.
Samantha, thank you so much once again for enlightening us, for inspiring us, for teaching us, as you always do when you come to Grace this Bima. I'm going to share an impromptu story about noticing. About a month ago, I took Samantha out for lunch, and we were finished with lunch, and the waitress came over and cleared our settings and then brought over a new setting, and I was kind of confused. And then they brought over a dessert, one that we obviously didn't order. And for a minute, we both looked at each other. No, we didn't order dessert. No, this was the gift of the manager because she liked Samantha's star, her Star of David that she was wearing. And that is a tribute to what we need to notice. We are very, very attuned to all of the hatred and all of the animosity in this world. But when we have experiences where we are brave enough, as Samantha often, most times, is to express who she is and to live out that destiny in the face of the unknown, sometimes we are pleasantly surprised. And so we join together in a prayer for the state of Israel, page 377. Avinu Shabashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alo, Baruch et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. We join together on the bottom of the page in English.